The train stopped without warning, the sudden jolt snapping bodies together like broken pieces of wood thrown into a pile. The wheels screamed against the rails and then there was only silence, thick and suffocating. For a moment no one moved. The women stood packed so tightly inside the cattle car that even breathing felt like an act of defiance. Alina's lungs burned. The air stank of sweat, urine, fear, and old sickness. Someone near the floor moaned softly. Another woman whispered a prayer in a trembling voice, the words colliding with sobs before they reached the end of the sentence. Then the door exploded open. Light poured in, blinding after the darkness of the journey. Cold air followed, sharp as a blade, cutting through thin dresses and cracked lips. A dog barked. Boots struck the ground in perfect rhythm, echoing with mechanical precision. Shouts followed, harsh, unfamiliar words, barked without patience or mercy. Hands reached inside, grabbing arms and shoulders, yanking women forward. Alina stumbled as she was shoved toward the opening. Her legs had forgotten how to move properly. When she dropped down onto the frozen earth, pain shot up through her knees, but she did not scream. Around her, women fell, collided, cried out. The ground was hard and slick with frost. Floodlights illuminated everything in cruel brightness. There was no place for shadows, no place to hide. Barbed wire fences stretched farther than Alina could see, multiple layers of them humming faintly with electricity. Watchtowers stood like executioners waiting for their cue, rifles visible against the white sky. Black uniformed guards moved between the women, faces calm, almost bored, as if overseeing livestock instead of human beings. Alina tried to count how many women had arrived with her, but the mass felt endless. Young girls clutched their mothers. Elderly women shook uncontrollably. Some wore coats, others had nothing but torn skirts and shoes held together with string. One woman beside Alina kept repeating her name over and over again, as though afraid she might forget it if she stopped. A guard struck her across the face without warning. The sound echoed. Blood splattered onto the snow. The women were forced into rows, pushed and hit until the lines were straight. Anyone who moved too slowly felt a blow across the back or legs. Alina adjusted her posture, forcing herself upright, though her body begged to collapse. Her stomach cramped, empty and aching, and she suddenly realized how long it had been since she had last eaten properly. They were counted, then counted again, and again. Any mistake brought punishment. A woman several rows away lost her balance and fell forward. The guard did not hesitate, his boot slammed into her side. She cried out, tried to rise, failed. No one helped her. Helping was dangerous here. Alina understood that instantly. The woman was dragged out of line, her screams muffled as another guard hauled her away. Alina never saw her again. They were marched next, feet shuffling through snow and gravel, past buildings that looked too clean, too orderly for what they were. The words, Arbeit matched frei, were known to Alina, whispered even in fear, but she did not see them here. Ravensbruck did not pretend to offer freedom. It did not need lies. Inside a long concrete building, they were ordered to undress. Shame filled the room as clothing hit the floor. Naked bodies pressed together in the cold, scarred and thin and trembling. Guards watched, laughing quietly among themselves. Alina wrapped her arms around her chest, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Her wedding ring was torn from her finger. A photograph sewn into her dress vanished forever. Then came the shearing. One by one, the women sat on stools while clippers buzzed. Hair fell in lifeless clumps, piling on the floor like proof of erasure. When Alina's turn came, she stared straight ahead as the clippers scraped along her scalp. The vibration made her teeth chatter. As the last locks fell away, she felt exposed, stripped not just of hair but of identity. The mirror afterward showed a face she barely recognized, eyes too large, cheeks sunken, skull painfully visible. She looked sick. She looked erased. A uniform was thrown at her, striped fabric that reeked of previous bodies. It hung awkwardly on her frame. Wooden shoes bruised her feet with every step. A number was spoken, then repeated, then stitched. Alina tried to say her name once, softly, but it felt wrong in her mouth. She was no longer Alina. They were herded again, pushed through gates that slammed shut behind them with finality that echoed in their bones. The sound stayed with her, vibrating in her chest. This place had a sound of its own, metal, orders, misery held together by fear. When night came, they were driven into barracks. Long wooden structures packed with bunk beds stacked 3 levels high. The smell inside was overwhelming: unwashed bodies, sickness, decay. Women argued softly over space before exhaustion defeated anger. Elena climbed to an upper bunk, sharing it with 3 others. There was no blanket. The straw mattress scratched her skin. Somewhere nearby, someone sobbed quietly into her hands. Another woman whispered about rumors, about labor, about starvation, about things worse than death. Elena closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Every creak made her flinch. Every shout outside sent her heart racing. Then the whistle blew. It cut through the night, sharp and freezing, and left behind silence that felt heavier than sound. Elena did not know what it meant, but dread washed through her body all the same. She lay awake until her muscles burned from tension, staring at the wooden planks above her head. By the time her eyes finally closed, she already understood something terrible and permanent. She had arrived in Ravensbruck, and whatever she had been before no longer existed. Morning arrived at Ravensbruck not with light, but with violence. A whistle tore through the barracks, shrill and unforgiving, dragging the women out of shallow, fractured sleep. Guards burst in moments later, barking orders as batons struck wooden bunks and unprotected flesh. Elena's body resisted movement, stiff and aching, but she forced herself upright. Hesitation here was punished instantly. She slid from the bunk, feet slamming into frozen shoes, and joined the tide of striped figures spilling into the yard. Roll call began before the sun fully rose. The women were arranged in endless rows, standing perfectly still while frost settled on their shoulders. Snow crept into the hems of their dresses and soaked through to skin, but no one dared shift. Hours passed. Elena felt time stretch and warp, marked only by the burning in her legs and the dull throb behind her eyes. Somewhere behind her a woman collapsed. A guard dragged her out of formation, her body leaving a shallow trail in the snow. The count restarted. By the end of roll call, Elena no longer felt her feet. When it was finally over, the women were marched to work details. Hunger gnawed at her so sharply it felt alive, clawing from the inside. Breakfast, if it could be called that, had been a tin cup of watery liquid that tasted faintly of turnips and rust. She swallowed it without thinking, afraid it would be taken away if she paused. Work consumed everything. Days blurred into one another until they lost meaning. Elena carried stones until her shoulders felt as though they were splitting apart. Other days she sewed uniforms in a factory. Her fingers numb and bleeding as the machines screamed around her. The irony cut deep, but there was no strength left to dwell on it. Exhaustion dulled outrage. Survival narrowed the world to breath, step, repeat. Whispers traveled faster than guards. Women spoke in fragments, careful and quiet. They talked about selections, about blocks where women went and did not come back. Elena learned about the infirmary and the doctors who waited there, men who wore clean coats and carried clipboards as casually as batons. She heard about injections that burned like fire, operations without anesthesia, limbs infected on purpose. The fear of being chosen sank deep into her bones. One afternoon, her friend Sophia did not return from labor. Sophia had been a steady presence since the first night, offering shared warmth and whispered courage. When the women reassembled in the barracks that evening, Elena scanned the room, heart pounding, searching for her familiar face. She did not see it. She asked quietly, carefully, but no one answered. Silence was safer than truth. That night, screams erupted across the camp. They came from the direction of the infirmary, rising and falling, raw and animal. Elena froze on her bunk, breath caught in her throat. The sound clawed its way inside her, lodged there, refusing to leave. Women clutched one another, eyes wide, refusing to speak. The screams went on for what felt like hours before they suddenly stopped. No one slept after that. Sophia never returned. Hunger deepened as winter tightened its grip. Rations shrank, even as work intensified. Elena watched strong women weaken, watched ribs emerge where warmth once clung. Faces hollowed, eyes dimmed. Women traded stories of meals they used to cook, recipes recited like prayers. Some chewed bits of wood to trick their stomachs. Others collapsed and were carried away at dawn, wrapped in thin blankets that did nothing to hide the shape of death. Death became routine, and that frightened Elena more than anything. Bodies were lined up like objects outside the barracks, counted with the same care as the living. Grief was swift and quiet. Tears were swallowed. Names faded quickly because remembering was dangerous. Memory slowed you down. Slowness got you killed. Yet something inside Elena refused to disappear. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the fences, she watched the smoke rising in the distance. The smell had become impossible to ignore. It coated her tongue, clung to her hairless scalp. She knew now what burned there. She wondered how many women she had passed, spoken to, slept beside, were now carried away in that smoke. One evening, during another endless roll call, a woman next to her swayed. Elena instinctively reached out, steadying her with a quick grip. A guard noticed. He stormed toward them, face twisted in fury. Elena released the woman immediately, staring straight ahead, heart hammering. The guard struck the other woman across the face and dragged her from the line. Elena could only stand still, frozen with guilt and terror. That night, Elena cried for the first time since arriving. The tears came silently, sliding down her cheeks as she lay pressed against strangers. She cried for Sophia, for herself, for the person she used to be. She cried because she was still alive, and because she wasn't sure how much longer that would be true. Weeks passed. Or months. Time dissolved into survival. Elena learned how to conserve energy, how to keep her face blank. She learned when to look down and when to disappear into the crowd. Every small skill was another thread holding her to life. Then one day, the guard's behavior changed. Orders became frantic. Sirens in the distance sounded unfamiliar. Bombs thundered far away, shaking the ground beneath the barracks. Whispers surged again, this time carrying something dangerous and fragile: hope. The war was turning. The guards burned documents, moved prisoners, shouted with less certainty. When the gates finally opened, it did not feel real. Elena stood among the survivors, scarcely able to comprehend the silence. The watchtowers were empty. The guards were gone. She felt lighter walking out of Ravensbruck, yet something heavy remained lodged inside her chest. She left with scars she could never explain fully, memories she would carry in quiet corners of her mind. Ravensbruck had taken her warmth, her youth, her certainty. But it had not taken her entirely. Inside those fences, women had been stripped of everything except the will to endure. And that, Elena realized, was something even Ravensbruck could not destroy.